Unlock the secrets of Skinwalker Ranch with insider access. Get exclusive behind-the-scenes content, deep dives into experiments, live chats with the team, and 24/7 live access. Join now for a free 7-day trial.
With us today is former security and investigations officer for Skinwalker Ranch during Robert Bigelow's ownership, Chris Bartel. Chris, thank you for being here with us. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate your time.
No, thank you. And before we get into your previous work at Skinwalker Ranch, how would you describe your childhood growing up in the open pastures of Kansas? And what experiences led you to make the decision of joining the Air Force in 1997?
Yeah. Growing up in Kansas, grew up on a ranch. We had horses. My mother used to break wild horses, and my father was your typical blue collar, worker, worked for a welding company in a small town. I'm from a very small town in Kansas. So you grew up with kind of a true grit childhood where you're out alone a lot, out in the woods and stuff. So growing up out there's not a lot of, as a young man, you get older and job opportunities are kind of scarce in a small town. So how I joined the Air Force was by luck. Four of my friends in high school all got the idea to join the military one night. And I said, okay, let's go. So we went to the Armed Forces recruiting station in Wichita, Kansas, and we talked to the Marines, Army, Navy, and Air Force was last. And by the time we got to the Air Force, I had already kind of checked out. Like, I was not interested at all in anything. Because I wanted to go to art school. That was my objective, was to go to Colorado to go to art school. That's what I wanted to do. And so the Air Force recruiter, he was pretty good, and he picked up on that I was kind of detached, and he asked me, he goes, what do you want to do? And I said, well, honestly, I want to do art or photography. And he goes, you could be an artist for the Air Force. And I'm like, what? And he showed me that there is a program for the Thunderbirds at Nellis Air Force Base and everything else with the Air Force. And he said, but first you got to be a cop. You have to go in as a cop first and then later cross-train. So that day I signed, all four of us signed up to be cops in the Air Force. And within a couple months, I was in basic training tech school and then got my first duty assignment, which was ironically Nellis Air Force Base, but as a cop. So, and then out of all of us, I was the only one that made it through the tech school and training, and my other friends didn't make it, unfortunately. So I guess it was just luck or destiny or whatever you want to call it. But looking back now, it was pretty crazy. So I ended up at Nellis Air Force Base, worked out there for, I was in Vegas for 20 years. Most of that time was in the Air Force at Nellis and also Creech Airforce Base in Indian Springs, Nevada, where I was an instructor for the Air Force as well. So a lot of history out there in the Nevada desert.
That officer had some really good persuasion. That is amazing.
He was very good. I actually I just recently been going through some old pictures, and I found my pictures of me and him standing next to each other at the recruiting station. I should have sent them to you, but I forgot. Pretty funny looking back at it now.
But everything is as it should be. And it seems that is the case specifically for you because of your background in the Air Force and doing all the work that you did. You were contracted by Robert Bigelow's team back in 2010. Can you share how you obtained the job as a security and an investigation officer at Skinwalker Ranch, and what were your responsibilities in that role?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but it's I think it's important because details matter for sure in the situation.
We want to hear everything, Chris. Give us all the details.
I appreciate that. So like I said, I was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base, and Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas is a very unique location. It's the hub for all Black World operations for the state of Nevada. And, Nevada's owned 86% by the federal government. A lot of black sites out there, obviously Area 51 that people know about for sure. The Nevada test site, Totem Paw test range, and there's some other locations out there as well. So in the Air Force, my very first Air Force supervisor worked at Area 51, and he kind of groomed me at Nellis to just to be a good airman, I guess, to be professional, have a sharp uniform, and have a good post briefing and all this stuff. And he said it would take you far, whatever. I didn't really understand what he meant at the time, but now I do. So when I got out of the Air Force, I got out of active duty in 2006. And then I went from 2006 to 2009 in the reserves, once again, still at Nellis. But I got hired with the Nevada test site for the Department of Energy up in Mercury, Nevada, where I obtained a Q-level clearance as a security police officer. And so that was a very intense process to get that Q clearance, and what a different world it was indeed. You're involved in a lot of special access programs, a lot of very interesting projects, a lot of things obviously I can't talk about. And then that was pretty much a golden ticket once you got your Q clearance. And then what happened was my wife, who was also in the Air Force, she was stationed at Nellis with me as well. She got orders to Malmstrom Airforce Base in Montana. Well, she's from Montana, so we moved to Malmstrom Air Force Base back in late 2009. And the Air Force was downsizing at the time. And I had just, I left the test site, went with her up to Malmstrom, and they gave her she got pregnant with our first child. And they gave her the option, because the Air Force was downsizing, to either stay in or get out of the Air Force. And she was a cop like myself in security forces. And she was like, honestly, I don't want to be deployed all the time while having a baby. And I said, okay, I understand that. But that means, I didn't have a job. So we rolled the dice back to Las Vegas. And I started making phone calls to my connections out there with the Air Force and the DOE. But there was a federal hiring freeze at the time. So I couldn't go back into the DOE side right away. And I contacted one of my old supervisors in the Air Force. He got in contact with the guy who had the contract for Area 51 at the time for Groom Lake. So I got hired with Area 51 first before even landing back in Las Vegas for a company called CSC, Computer Science Corporation. And I was first hired on as an escort duty part-time, but it wasn't a full-time gig. And I needed a full-time gig because I had a brand new baby coming, first-time father. I was scared to death and didn't know what to do. And so another friend of mine reached out and said, hey, contact this guy. He's got some project in Utah with some aerospace company and some ranch. And this is back in 2010. And I said, okay. So I called him up, and he was another Air Force buddy of mine. And in this world, it's all about reputation. It's about who you know, really. That's how it boils down to. So I reached out to him, and he said he was very vague about the job, but I had an active Q clearance, so that was a green light to get in. And then next thing I know, I'm interviewing for that job at the same time working for 51. But obviously, you can't tell anybody you're working for 51. So I kind of kept that to myself because it was a part-time gig, and this was a full-time gig. So then I interviewed and got the job for BAAS, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, for Robert Bigelow, specifically for Skinwalker Ranch. And then in 2010, I ended up boots on the ground at Skinwalker Ranch, working there full-time, and then also part-time for 51. And then eventually worked the Janet detail for 51. But then I quit 51 altogether because it's a long story, but I ended up working full-time for the BAAS detail instead at the ranch. So yeah, it's a long story, pretty crazy, but that's the whole thing of it.
No, and I loved every single detail that you could provide for that story. One thing that I would like to ask before we continue is, you mentioned the Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. That place, it's now famous due to the UFOs and the nukes that took place back in the 60s. Were you aware of that story during the time that you were in that area?
Yeah, I mean, as Air Force cops, we all kind of talk about, weird, spooky, creepy stuff and that you experience, and there had been talk about, possible UFO sightings around the area, or ghost phenomena. That was another one. But I never experienced anything or saw anything myself. There was also another section of people who, don't believe in any of it at all and said, no, it's all BS. But there was definitely some truth to something was going on out there. But I can't confirm anything on my side that I saw. But yes, I did hear stories while I was out there. And
what were your thoughts on those stories?
It made sense. I mean, it's a possibility. Even with my professional background, I'm kind of jaded when it comes to the whole UFO topic, because some of the places I used to work at. but I still believe that there is some type of presence or phenomena associated with some of people's experiences. So I don't try to discount everything, but usually when most people come forward and tell the story, I kind of look at their background of where they really worked at boots on the ground versus other, because there's some people that will tell stories and they might be just a military observer who witnessed military technology that they're unfamiliar with because they haven't worked at locations where this technology has been developed and tested. So with my background, I kind of have a different insight or viewpoint when it comes to this.
That's a really interesting point to make. And I'm really glad that you did, because at the end of the day, it's about perspective. It's also about the background that you have to be able to fill in the gaps on the things that you see. I mean, that's basic knowledge, but also it's being skeptical, having a skeptical mindset. You can't believe everything that you're told.
Right.
And you have this really fantastic military background to be able to read people. And that is so important, especially when someone is telling a story that might be classified as whack, crazy, unheard of, weird, right? You have to read them in order to get a feel on if they're telling the truth or not and what is their motive behind it. I get it. And I think that is amazing. And I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it's important, like you said, blind acceptance is the enemy of truth. It really is. And it seems like sometimes in this UFO topic, true believer mentality sometimes crushes critical thinking. And that's just part, I get caught up in it too. Sometimes I'll go down the rabbit hole and get tunnel vision and second guess myself. And I always ground myself on two things: my professional background of where I've actually physically worked at, and then also the indigenous cultures before us, what they were involved in. And those are my two my things I kind of ground myself on. So yeah.
When you initially started working at the ranch, you mentioned that you had limited knowledge about the legend and lore surrounding the area. So at what point did you become aware of these stories of the Skinwalker and things like that? And did you believe them initially?
Well, yeah. Actually, I learned about skinwalkers at the Nevada test site first, way back in 2006. There was talk about skinwalker stuff happening out there at the Nevada test site, but nobody really understood what it was, But there was people who reported seeing strange like creatures or whatever at night and stuff like that. When I got to Skinwalker in 2010, like you said, there was no, Skinwalker Ranch wasn't a mainstream topic. There was nothing available besides that one book to learn about the history. And so it was very kind of hard to dig in at first and do a job because, we're tasked to secure the property, but also we were the ones conducting the investigations during that timeline, so which meant we had to make contacts with locals and do follow-ups and everything else. And most of the stuff I got was from talking to local people around the area. But I didn't know specifically a lot about the history. I don't know if that was done intentionally because, this is kind of how programs fail, is lack of communication. If not everybody is talking or providing intel or data, the program is going to fail 100%. And I think that's kind of what happened with OSAP. There was all this other talk about religious stuff that caused the program to fail, and that might be very well true, but the big problem is lack of communication. There was definitely a serious lack of communication. I'm not sure if that was done on purpose or just by accident.
So during your time on the ranch, as soon as you got there, you had a background of hearing the name the Skinwalker, but not necessarily the work or the other stories that were previously that had taken place there. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, we didn't really refer to the ranch as Skinwalker Ranch. We just called it the ranch.
Right. We
just knew that there was history associated with the property. I will tell you, the locals truly believe it's cursed land. There was a time, actually, it's kind of weird. My first night out there, I drove from Vegas to Fort Duchesne in Utah, and there is a place called the Ute Plaza, which is it's on the reservation. It's a grocery store. And the guy that was training me was like, hey, grab some groceries before we go into the property, because once we go into Skinwalker, we don't leave for 2 weeks. We're stuck there, basically. Besides going to Vernal once a week to get supplies, that's it. Other than that, you're stuck on the ranch, basically. That's your primary objective. So I went to the U Plaza, beautiful place, great people. But he warned me, he's like, you're going to be an outsider here, and you're not very well liked because people know who you are. You know, you worked for Robert Bigelow. And I was just like, what? And sure enough, definitely some negative stares. And I'll never forget, I went to pay for my groceries, and the lady behind the counter refused to hand me my money physically. She put it on the counter and took a step away and like kind of walked away from me. And I kind of looked at my partner like, what was that about? He said, I told you, they believe you're really cursed because you work on that property. And I thought to myself, what the hell did I get myself into? You know, here I am, you know, before coming to Skinwalker Ranch, I had already spent most of my professional career working in special access programs for the Department of Energy and for the Air Force, and obviously 51 as well. And then now I'm in a whole different world, you know. It was quite an eye-opening experience, to say the least.
So then throughout your tenure, you had quite a few conversations with you tribal members, including the elders. What valuable insights or knowledge did you gain from those interactions?
There is the belief that the land was cursed, for sure. That to show respect to the property is the key thing. And that's something I took very seriously. My mother was raised on Indian reservations because my great-grandfather was a project manager for the Southwest for all the reservations out there. So my mom raised me very spiritual on that aspect. And so I went to her for a lot of guidance because she does have Cherokee in her. And so she was kind of my spirit guide during that whole time. And I would ask her about stuff and kind of cross-reference it to some of the locals I talked to. But some of the things they just said was, you know, be careful out there. It's no joke. There's nothing to toy with. But once again, it was very few and far between people that we talked to, because for the most part, nobody came close to that property unless like try to scare their girlfriends or whatever on a Friday night. But the real locals in the area at the time stayed away from that property because they understood that there was definitely some probably dark history out there. And over the years, I got to kind of experience that myself.
Jeez. It goes to show the way that people react to the ranch or to the stories of the ranch, it gives you a guideline to see how you should also potentially act towards it. But what's really cool what you mentioned here, and it's something that we've heard time and time again when it comes to land in general and Native Americans, is to respect the land. Now, if you don't mind, could you please provide me an example of what it means to respect the land, at least from your perspective?
Right. So the first year I was out there, I got to say, it was all about ghost busting and alien hunting and data collecting and doing investigations and all this stuff. You know, we're trying to collect data, I guess, for the OSAP program. At the time, I didn't know about the OSAP program. I just knew we had a contractor, basically. So we're very laser focused on trying to collect some type of data. And as you can tell from the TV show and everything else, it's very hard to collect data out there. So once in 2012, when everything just stopped, we were out there alone. And being out there alone is a whole different ball game. And that was the time where I decided to put down the camera, put down the equipment, and start to connect to the property more of a spiritual aspect. And I think eventually that's what the new team will have to do in the end, is we'll not have to worry about collecting data and understand they're on sacred grounds out there and connect on a spiritual level. That's the only way you're going to understand that property. But some of the things I did personally was give tobacco offerings in certain locations where I felt there was a strong presence there, or where I found artifacts. I found several artifacts, hundreds of artifacts on that property that I had dated in Vernal, Utah at the museum. And to me, that was my primary focus, was preserving and documenting that history, because I truly believed the energy, the frequency, the vibration, that history is displaced in the natural environment. And if you tune in your own personal frequency to that environment, you can have an experience, a positive one or a negative one. It depends on your personality. It depends on what you project. If you go out to the ranch looking for darkness, I will promise you, you will find it. But if you go out there looking for the more positive aspects, you'll have a positive experience. And that's when I first was out there, I dabbled in diving into the darkness. And then through my photography, it kind of helped me evolve in a more spiritual, positive aspect. And it changed everything. I can honestly say my time out there enhanced my creative vision. Now, whether that be just being out there alone for all those years, or maybe I tapped into that frequency that helped enhance my vision. But also, some of the other things I would do is I would fish in the southern tree line and catch a fish and take that fish and take it over to the Eastern Valley and leave it on the rocks as a form of offering, because I believe the Eastern Valley is the single most important spot in the entire ranch. I promise you that location is the most important, because I found artifacts going back 10,000 years ago to the Paleo period at that specific location, overlapping layers of history at one single location. And so what I did was I had a topographical map of the property, and every time I found an artifact or an area of interest, let's say, I would GPS it and then mark it on the map. And then I was trying to correlate people's experiences to maybe an abundance of artifacts. And I was finding there was a connection there. And it was kind of ignored a little bit during my time when I presented data. That wasn't the primary focus. So I kind of kept it on my own, and that was my primary focus out there. And I think because of that, the ranch opened up more to me specifically, because I invested so much of my physical time out there really trying to respect the land. I did the best I could, you know.
You mentioned that when you provided the data to the team, it wasn't the primary focus. Are you able to speak of what was the primary focus if what you provided was not?
I think the primary focus now, looking at it now, was probably to see the long-term effects of ranch exposure out there on us out there. You know, we were told that the ranch, we were there to collect data, do investigations, provide security. At the same time, there was data being collected on us as a living laboratory, which is good and negative. Is good and bad. But I think there was definitely some miscommunication and stuff like that. Looking back now, should have been more clear. And I think there would have been a better objective and results in some of our own investigations out there, because it wasn't just investigations that we were doing out there. We were also doing experiments. We were the ones doing experiments out there. Sitting inside Homestead 2 in a lawn chair at 3 o'clock in the morning and in pure darkness, trying to make contact with the phenomenon with the recording device, EVP sessions, flashlights, that type of stuff. And psychologically, it was pretty intense. But I'll say by year 4, 5, 6, the ranch was like a second home to me. You know, I was doing a lot of camping outside with the dogs, sleeping on the mesa at night. There's a location on Skinwalker Ranch. Unfortunately, Brandon doesn't own that area, but it's a very significant area. It's where I used to spend a lot of time with the dogs at night, and I would stargaze. And I really cherish those moments because it was a very unique timeline. And that's kind of why I do these podcasts when people ask me, because I want people to understand that timeline is very unique. It'll never happen again. So it was a very small group of people that were involved, and I'm representing those guys who were involved during that time. There was a very small group of us, and for some people, the ranch caused a negative experience, but for some, it was a positive. And I try to focus more on the positive, which kind of shows in my photography, which luckily I kept during my time out there. And it was never going to be I was never going to produce the photography for people. It was going to be a story for my kids one day. But I'm glad I'm able to share it now with people who are very interested in the area.
I really, really like that. I like that mindset, that mentality of being optimistic, number one. But number two, creating a portfolio for your kids to see later on. And now that's on the website, skinwalkerranchportfolio.org. And what I liked particularly about that website is one quote that I came across that you had written. And it says, "Sometimes in order to put myself in the right mindset, I'd imagine that I just landed on a foreign planet and it was my job to find proof of life. This allowed me to absorb the areas and focus on the details." And this really shows not only in your photography, because what some might see as random, why'd you take a picture of this, why that, for you it's very important, it's very significant. But on top of that, and you stated this a little bit earlier, is when you came across weird or unusual natural structures or artifacts, you would pinpoint a GPS location as well, and then you created this map to see where it was the strangeness was most significant. Now,
Mhm.
in the areas that you found, because you had mentioned one specifically, but there are a few that have points of interest. Why do you think it's those areas in particular? Is it the material? Is there a water? Are there certain minerals? What do you think is going on in those areas?
At the time, I wasn't too sure. I was because at the time, once again, I got to remind people during my timeline, there were no group of scientists out there with equipment. I think that's a big misconception out there trying to collect data or find out what was going on. Unlike the team now that has unlimited resources and support, which is amazing to see. So at the time, I wasn't sure what was going on. It wasn't until I met James Keenan, who pointed out that there was magnetic anomalies throughout that whole area. And oddly enough, some of the areas like in the Eastern Valley and the Triangle, there's magnetic anomalies, and that's where also I found abundance of artifacts and are close to those locations. So either indigenous tribes were going there for ceremonial purposes or for spiritual purposes. It would make sense that they were naturally drawn to these locations because their magnetic charge was being pulled to there for a specific reason. Now, like I said before, the start of my time out there was all focused on collecting data and ghost busting and all that stuff. Towards the end, it was all about spiritual evolution for me personally, and I think that's also the same road that those indigenous tribes took. They went out there to evolve spiritually, because if we look at the indigenous tribes back then, they didn't have all the fancy equipment that we have today to document the phenomena. What we consider the phenomena, they consider just part of their culture. So what they would do is they would observe the phenomena and then evolve with the phenomena, or spiritually evolve with the phenomena, and understand that we are truly connected to the earth and universe. And those people were 100% connected to the earth and universe versus how we are today. And today's society, we are kind of disconnected from nature. So that was my focus. And when I met James Keenan, he brought that up, and I was like, wow, that makes sense. There are some type of magnetic anomalies, which the new team has now shown on the TV show. So there is something going on out there. It's not just, I used to think maybe it was because of good hunting grounds, as a tribe, and that might be true, but there was also other things going on. And I talked to a local last year when I was out there with James Keenan and Carl the Crusher. We talked to a local who specifically said there's a place adjacent from Skinwalker Ranch that people used to go to and do like vision quests or fire dancing and have these visions of the Eastern Valley area from Skinwalker Ranch. So there was something going on.
What are vision quests? Could you explain that?
Yeah, vision quests are like it's like a type of supernatural experience that you want to gain. Like you go through a vision quest where you endure meditations or sweat lodges to try to make a contact with like a guardian spirit or an earth spirit to help guide you on a spiritual journey. So like a vision quest, that would be considered more of a vision quest. Like you're enduring a sweat and you're meditating and you get into this hyper focus state where you have these hallucinations, or maybe you are connecting to some type of higher entity or spirit or energy, frequency, and vibration that's helping you guide your own self and elevating your consciousness. And that was my, what's that?
Did you engage in any of those?
I meditated a lot on Skinwalker Ranch. Like I said, that location, which I call Meditation Rock, actually, with the dogs. I would do meditation sessions out there in the morning and at night. Sometimes I would try to astral project on that location. I would lay. There was one time there was a meteor shower in the basin, and it was beautiful. It was a once in a lifetime experience. And I'm laying there on this rock with the dogs, and at the time we had 3 labs. William is the last of the survivors of those labs, and I'm laying there, and it felt like I was floating into the universe. It was a very vivid experience. It's a very vivid experience. And I just felt like it was almost frightening for a second. It felt like I was leaving my body. So I would do that a lot. And that meditation came from my mother, who taught me meditation when I was like 12 years old. And that's something I do now. So what I do now is I'll go to these locations like Mount Wilson Ranch, where I just came back in November with Carl the Crusher, Chris Lato, and Brent Stone. And I'll take a couple rocks from that location, and I'll come back home to where I live now, and I'll sit in my office and I'll hold those rocks while listening to Native American flutes or drum circle music, powwow music, and I'll try to like really meditate. And then I'll go back to my photography while I was out there, and I'll start doing some of the flip imaging that I've been doing before, or seeing images in my photography that I missed, and kind of connecting that way. That's what I'm doing now. So I still practice meditation to this day. I think it's very important for everyone to practice meditation.
Yes, meditation and practicing being mindful. These are things that are rare in today's society, but are so crucial to live a wholesome and, I would say, almost a valuable life. Now, I think it's really fantastic that you had a job that fed your soul, that like gave you more than what you expected. You know, most of the time a job is to pay the bills, right? And you usually don't like it. In this case for you, while there's are some mixed feelings on really what you were doing, were you a part of the experiment and things like this, and looking at the positive aspect, it gave you so much. And this is something that so many people want, but don't know where to look. And I think at the end of the day, it's about the mindset. It really is.
It really is. And I'm glad you bring that up, because anybody can do it. And this is what I would suggest. Go out in your local area, find a good place to camp alone for 2 weeks. No cell service. Don't bring your cell phone. Bring a notebook. Go out there and listen to your thoughts. Project where you want to see yourself in the future. Write those things down in the notebook. Really focus on what's real: the earth beneath your feet, the stars above, like how our ancestors lived. And when I say indigenous, I don't mean just Native American. I mean all human species came from indigenous backgrounds. That's something that we don't do anymore. But while I was at Skinwalker during that time, I really made use of my time as much as possible. I still had a job to do, but at some point I was like, you know what? While I'm out here, I'm going to really try to tap into that frequency. And I feel like I did. I really do. Because I felt like I was being guided sometimes to find these locations and artifacts, because up until my time on the ranch, there wasn't people finding this type of stuff. And I've been back on the ranch many times now with the new team, and they'll tell you, we'll go out and I'll find stuff right there on the spot. I can go out right now and back up exactly what I'm saying and show people certain locations on that property that are very significant. And it's a very unique location, but it's also that whole Uinta Basin that has so much history out there. It's not just Skinwalker Ranch. There's lots of areas around there that are just as significant. And I've been fortunate to go to those locations as well. And I'm still going out there, as a matter of fact, to this day, because I really believe that indigenous history is very important, and we learn from it as best as we can, and take time to really absorb our surroundings and focus on what's real. I think that's super important.
Oh, yeah. Now, there have been claims of scientists during the Bigelow era reported sightings of portals on the property. Based on your knowledge and experiences, what can you share about the phenomenon of portals at Skinwalker Ranch?
When I got hired there, I didn't even hear that story, oddly enough, until like years later, when I read the book, the Hunt for the Skinwalker book. I never saw anything personally of a portal out there during my time, and I really tried to push myself to the environment. And a lot of us out there were doing the same thing. I don't remember anyone reporting that experience, and I'm not saying it didn't happen. You know, it wouldn't surprise me that it didn't happen, because the indigenous tribes have documented it with their petroglyphs and their drawings and stuff on the surrounding areas around there, that there is some type of portal or an area where the veil is thin. And there's actually, James Keenan had a good theory that at the triangle area, it's where overlapping layers of time exist. You have the past, present, and future overlapping at one location. And it makes sense, because I had experience in that location of a large wolf that didn't seem like a normal wolf, but it was at that specific location where I saw it. And other people have seen UFOs or whatever in that location as well. So maybe there is something with the magnetic anomalies where it's crushing time. And at certain periods of time in our timeline that we can experience it. It's his YouTube channel's got a lot of good, fascinating stuff on there. and I'm lucky to have him as a friend.
Travis Taylor also mentioned in the panel discussion that I had with the team that time's at the center of the anomaly. And it's interesting that you also bring up time because it's something that fascinates so many, and yet it can be rather difficult to conceptualize. And I think that's where the fascination lies, is that most people don't understand it. And look,
Right.
I'm in that category. I'm not saying that I do either, but it is
Yeah.
something that catches a lot of people's attention. Now, during your time on the ranch, and you've mentioned a few times today that you would be with the dogs a lot, and you had a very close bond with them, but very specifically with one of them who was
Mhm.
called Bella. And she
Yeah.
accompanied you on patrols, and you observed her reactions and behaviors because she's an animal biosensor. Amazing. We
Yeah.
need those. Can you share some instances where Bella's reaction seemed unusual or bizarre during your patrols?
Oh, yes. When I first got to the property, Bella was a border collie that was out there, and she had just survived a mountain lion attack. And she had these vicious scars running through the side of her body and her face. And she was the alpha of the pack. There was two other dogs at the time, Labradors, and she was the smallest one, but she was the alpha out of the pack. And I connected with her immediately because I had a dog in Kansas looked just like her, basically a border collie, and so I was very connected to that dog. And we would be on patrols all the time. Sometimes the other two dogs wouldn't come, but she was always there every time I would go out. And there was times where she was very close to me, where she felt uneasy, and I knew something was up in the area, like whether it be a predator or something else that I couldn't see. And there was other times that she would be out there with the other dogs trying to catch rabbits or gophers and stuff, and just having a fun time. But the dogs were a huge biosensor for us out there, and really were our only sensor at all. We didn't have cameras out there. We didn't have any working cameras out there on the property at all. So the dogs were absolutely vital to our day-to-day operations. And over the years, you got to build a very significant, strong bond to those dogs. And I love being out there with those dogs. And it was such an awesome experience. And these are just normal dogs. They weren't military trained dogs. They were just normal ranch dogs. But over the years, you got to understand their habits and pick up on little signs. And they would get, almost every springtime, they would get into a fight with a porcupine and get quills in their face. And you had to take them to Roosevelt to get the quills out. And it was like every year you had to deal with stuff like that. But I really miss those dogs. They were great. But Bella, she was awesome. She was a great dog.
Were there any instances where you felt as if she saved you from a dangerous situation or a dangerous environment?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially on nighttime operations. When you're out there working, you're tasked to secure the property, but also you're trying to collect data, which means you're working crazy hours. Like you work my day started around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning, and it would end around 4 a.m., 3 a.m. the next day. And that was for 2-week rotation. So you were constantly kind of operating in the red zone at all times. At nighttime, we had night vision goggles, but it was very treacherous to see the terrain sometimes, and I would follow the dog's path. And there were several times where I would have fell into a crevice on top of the mesa if I wasn't watching for the dogs. There was other times where she picked up on something, and there was a couple of large packs of coyotes out there on that property, and reservation dogs that are very vicious. And she would always alert to those before something would happen. Yeah, there was several times. I got tons of stories, but it was such a unique time to be with those dogs and pick up on their tails, basically. And they're a huge asset while being out there.
All animals, they are, again, they're great biosensors.
Yes.
Which is fantastic. But also, as you spent more time on the property, you began recording EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, during your own experiments and investigations. What kind of sounds or voices did you hear during your experiences there?
It was difficult because, especially when you're a one-man operation, so I would do a session outside Homestead 2, like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, while I'd be in there for a couple hours with the recording device, saying out loud, if something's here, please communicate. You have my permission to use my energy to manifest and get my attention. And I would try to listen to it, and I couldn't hear anything. And then the next day, I would be on patrol, and I had a nano iPod that I would put the MP3 in, and I'd be on patrol listening very closely while doing my rounds. And I never really picked up anything significant, like a voice or anything. Maybe some static electricity or maybe something weird, but nothing very significant. So after a while, I just kind of stopped doing EVP sessions, and that's when I focused more on the spiritual aspect of, hey, it really doesn't matter. What matters is absorbing as much of the energy out here as much as possible. And
In
yeah,
that case, what significant findings or experiences did you encounter during those experiments?
You would think I would have like a ton of experiences or stories after being out there for 6 years, but I only have a small handful. One time it was on the western side of the property. On the western side of the property, there's Homestead 2 and 3. Homestead 3, directly across from Homestead 3, is a location that's technically off Skinwalker Ranch, but it's Ute land. It's where the skins, there used to be hanging skins on poles in that location. And I was told that it's a sacred location where locals would go there and drop off skins as a form of sacrifice or offering to keep the bad energy off their property. That's what I was told. And so I always felt very uneasy on the western side of the property. And I think a lot of us did. There was times I would walk at night, and by the time I got to Homestead 2, I'd be halfway to Homestead 3, and I would turn back around and walk back to the east gate or go up in the mesa because I felt there was something strong there or evil there. There was one night where me and another officer were sitting there at Homestead 3, and we heard an Indian drum, like a bump bump, like a powwow music, and it lasted for maybe 5-6 seconds, just enough for me to get my recording device out and hit record, and it was gone. So things like that would happen. And orbs, I never saw any crazy orbs. As a matter of fact, when I first got out there, I helped debunk some of the orb stuff that was being documented, but I only saw 2 types of orbs out there during my time, an orange one on the eastern side and then one on the western side. And I thought it was just a person with a flashlight. And when I went over there was nobody there. But once again, documenting it was very difficult. Now, yeah, it could have been some type of natural phenomena, a bug or a ball lightning or whatever, but I don't know what it was. It happened within seconds. So it's very hard to document that stuff, and that's kind of how the ranch operates. It always happens when you least expect it. When your guard's down, you're not really paying attention. That's when the ranch opens up. And at least it did for me. And after a while, you just get kind of used to it, like, okay, it was another day, and that was it. But there was weeks, months where nothing would happen. Months and months where nothing would happen at all. And then one week it'd be just total chaos. So I don't know. It's very difficult. It's kind of hard to explain, really.
I get you. When it comes to anything strange, paranormal, supernatural, or just under the umbrella of weird phenomenon, it's not something that's on cue. It's random, just like with people, right? People are unpredictable. I can assume here that the phenomenon is as well. A little bit earlier, you mentioned orbs and thinking at first it was someone with a flashlight. Were there any instances where you had to deal with trespassers during your time working at Skinwalker Ranch? And if so, how did you handle those situations?
Yeah, there were several instances where we had to deal with trespassers. It got really sketchy when you're out there alone, and you had to develop little things to keep people away. And for instance, this sounds ridiculous, but I did it. I would go to Ace Hardware in Roosevelt, Utah. There's a hunting section out there, and I would buy skunk oil. And we would have Jersey barriers as you pulled up to the property, and I would spray the first barrier with this oil, and it was pungent, but it kept people away. They would drive up to that first location and they would leave because I couldn't be at all locations at one time. I had to really think outside the box. There was other times where I'd park the Highlander vehicle halfway down the road, and then I would hide in the tree line next to the road. And when people would come up, I would hit the lights on the Highlander, which would assume there was more than one of us on the property. But there was other times where people would jump the property and I would have to engage with them. Luckily, through verbal judo and my years of experience as a police officer and everything else, I was able to de-escalate a lot of situations before they got very sketchy. And at that time, sometimes we would call a local tribal police, the BIA, and they would come out to assist us. There was one event which I need to talk about because it gives you an idea of how serious it is out there. Because for me, the ranch during my timeline, obviously, it's not about entertainment. It was life or death out there. It was a very serious operation, very real. Things were going on. We all sacrificed a lot being out there because it was a whole different mindset. Not saying that the new team doesn't do that now, because they do, but it's a different type of world now. I never thought Skinwalker Ranch would be a mainstream topic, but it is. But there was an incident one time. This was probably back in 2012 or early 2013. I had been out all day hiking with the dogs and stuff, and I'm back at the east gate, and it's probably around 2 o'clock in the morning. And I see this car coming down the road, hauling butt, like really fast. And I see the BIA police chasing this, or the police chasing this individual. And the individual pulled off into the neighbor's property. And I'm sitting there, night vision and darkness. And I hear a volley of gunfire back and forth. And there was a suspect that was shooting the officer, and the officer shot the suspect and killed him. And after the gun battle stopped, I didn't hear anything. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, somebody's coming my way. I got to prepare for an engagement. And so I called BIA police, because the ranch, there's no cell service out there. There's only little areas, little pockets where you get cell service. And luckily there was a little pocket at the east gate where I knew of, where I was able to call the dispatch and say, you have an officer involvement shooting at I won't say the neighbor's name, but the property. And they came like guns blazing. And luckily they got there before it escalated any further. But that gives you an idea, because you're working on a reservation. It's a different set of rules out there. It's a different type of world, and you got to respect everybody's a world out there. So there is a couple situations I got into some real sketchy situations, but luckily nobody got hurt. And not just me, other guys too, obviously as well. We had an officer get hit in the face with a rock. There was real stuff going on out there that isn't talked about. But yeah, there was some very sketchy moments out there for sure.
Well, not only that, but in 2011, you and your family experienced the Hitchhiker effect. Can you provide details on what occurred during that incident?
Yeah, I've only talked about it a couple times, but I didn't even know what it was. Like, we didn't even know what a hitchhiker was or anything like that. I had just been, going to the ranch back to back to back, and we had a brand new baby, and my wife, who is a cop, she's true grit, doesn't really believe in any of this stuff. So when she says something, I listen. And she mentioned that she's having these weird experiences in the house with something. And I was like, what? And so she described what she saw was like a shadow person or something. And so I thought maybe it was, first time mom, maybe postpartum depression. I don't know. What do I say? So I have her leave for the day, and I'm watching my son. And sure enough, I experienced something as well inside the house, where I see something very unusual, and it felt very dark. And so I engaged with it, told to leave, and it left. And then I did a report on it. And then I contacted through BAAS, and that was during the OSAP program. So that was a documented case. And so I contacted my mother, once again, basically my spiritual advisor, and I said, hey, this is what happened. What do I do? Excuse me. And she suggested that the next time I go to the ranch to use sage to smudge the house. And so that's what I did. The next time I went to the ranch, I took some sage that's out there, and I smudged the house, which is it's a ceremonial thing where you burn sage, and you walk around the corners of your house, and you say good things, and you project a positive atmosphere. And after that happened, never had a problem since. And that's kind of also around the same time my perception shifted to more of the indigenous cultures out there and that history. That's when everything shifted for me. It was almost like when you go to Skinwalker Ranch or some of these locations that are sacred grounds, which I believe are sacred grounds or hallowed grounds, that energy can attach to you and follow you home, and then present itself as a warning saying, hey, look, you trespass on my land, now I'm trespassing on your land, tread lightly. And once that kind of happened, I took a new perspective of like, I'm really on sacred grounds out here. It's not a joke. It's not a game. there is something else out here that I'm missing and wants my attention. And once I shifted my perception that way, my entire experience changed on Skinwalker Ranch for a more positive. And I think that was done on purpose. I think if you go out there with ill intentions or not a genuine heart or genuine spirit, you're going to get checked. You're going to get your card pulled. You're going to get humbled. I saw it firsthand with my own teammates. You know, I saw that ranch tear people apart, and it's unfortunate. But now maybe it's being out there alone, and you know, especially during my time, it's all of us are prior military veterans with backgrounds, you know, and you're out there alone for 2 weeks with your thoughts. It's not necessarily a good place to be out there if you have any demons in your closet, you know. But luckily, I focused more on the positives and had a better experience.
During that time frame, 2011, 2010, what was your mindset before the Hitchhiker effect happened to you?
My mindset was, honestly, it was kind of like, this is just a joke. This place is another ranch. Like I grew up in Kansas, you know, because I grew up in a farm or a ranch in Kansas out in the middle of nowhere. So it felt like that as well. I was very familiar with the terrain and the environment of normal ranch dynamics. And I think some of the stories throughout the years, or maybe even some people's experiences, are from people who were born and raised in cities, and you throw them in an environment where they're not used to a country dynamics, and they see something or they have an experience that could possibly be easily explainable, but they choose not to explain it. And so at first I thought maybe the ranch was just a joke, like it was just nothing going on. And then that incident happened, and then finding the artifacts, and then taking a step back and being like, wow, there's something else going on here. And then talking to locals, finding the caves. Like I found 3 different cave systems on the property. One that I showed the team in 2021, which was a very awesome experience. And then the ranch opened up more. When I focused more of my own personal energy into the property, showing that respect, the land opened up more. I wasn't out there with no ill intentions or negative charge. I was out there as more of a visitor, trying to respect the land as much as possible and doing the best I can to understand that property.
You keep mentioning that the ranch opens up or closes. What do you think the ranch really is? Do you think it's an entity of some kind? Do you think it's just a sacred land? So it's like a collective? In your opinion, from your years that you've been there, your research, looking back on it, visiting it again in recent times, what do you think is it?
I personally believe, and this is through years of my own personal investigations out there, led to this conclusion, that the ranch is ancient sacred grounds, that there is history out there, that native or indigenous history, that energy, frequency, and vibration is naturally displaced in the environment. And when you go out there, there's a chance where you can engage with that phenomena if you tune your frequency into that, your own personal frequency, where you vibrate into that environment. I believe the land is spiritual. It's more about spirituality versus, you got to have more of a spiritual mindset versus a scientific mindset out there. I truly believe that. And I think at some point, when it's all said and done, when the TV show is over and the books are done and the TV shows are over and the movies, the only true foundation is the indigenous history that's embedded out there. That is undeniable fact. And details matter, and history matters, and the truth matters. And that is my primary focus while I was out there. It took years of going through the paces and enduring a lot of things and trying to figure stuff out. Like I said, there was no team of scientists, or there wasn't this big conglomerate group, like teamwork thing. It was guys out there trying to put stuff together, do internal investigations, trying to figure out there were some guys who didn't do anything out there, who didn't care. They didn't want to be out there. They just wanted to collect the paycheck. But there was a couple of us that really wanted to figure out the property. And I feel like that is my focus, and that's what I really believe. And I think if you talk to any of the cast members on the TV show offline, they'll tell you, when I come out there, this is what I show. And I've showed the team on camera several times exactly what I'm talking about. Now, I'm not saying it's the ultimate answer. I'm just saying it's another layer to many layers of Skinwalker Ranch, because I've said before that property is bigger than a TV show. It's bigger than my photography. It's bigger than a government contract or any of this stuff. It is real history that's out there, and it needs to be respected and documented. And you should go out there and be a patient observer and help spiritually evolve. That's my perspective of it. And it's not just that location, it's that whole basin. And I think that's the most important aspect.
When you use the term spirituality, it's a very weighted term in today's age. There's a lot of weight to it, and there's a lot of different ideas of what it means. From your perspective, what does it mean?
It means connecting to the earth and the universe, and understanding that we're all connected as a species, connected to the earth atomically through our atoms, but also spiritually connected to everybody, to the earth, to the universe. This is what our ancient indigenous people believed in as well. It's forgotten about. It's ignored in today's society. We live in a very disconnected society now, and look at the result of that is a very chaotic society. I believe nature is the key to everything. We're all a byproduct of nature. And I have 3 sons, and I try to raise them the same way. And my first son, his middle name is Orion, after Orion's belt, for 2 reasons. One, I wanted him to always remember that we are connected to the universe. Atomically, we are scientifically connected to the universe. Now, also, you can spiritually project yourself in that mindset as well. But also, during my time on Skinwalker Ranch, Orion's belt was very, very predominant out there, and I felt strongly connected to that constellation. And so at the time, I was always at the ranch all the time, so I missed him a lot. So I felt that connection of the stars was always important, So it was cool.
I have one final question for you. In your opinion, considered everything that you've witnessed and heard on the property, what do you consider to be the most compelling and convincing evidence or significant evidence related to Skinwalker Ranch?
I don't think there is, honestly. I don't think there really is something very significant, because a lot of it is perception, what people perceive as evidence versus what is real evidence. Because as you know, the TV show, every time there's an episode aired, there's also people that debunk what they presented. And this gets to a point, it's like, well, who's right? Who's right? The team is in a very tough spot because they have to produce for the TV show, but they're also trying. I know Eric Bard is always trying to collect some type. He doesn't care about the TV show or not. I've been out there. He is legit trying to figure stuff out. I think there isn't really significant evidence to prove or disprove anything out there. You have to go out there and just absorb that energy in that environment. If there's anything to prove, it's the native artifacts that are out there. That's undeniable. The stones. I always say the truth is in the stones or in the rocks. And it's true because they don't lie. Those artifacts aren't out there just by chance. There are people out there for a specific reason. Now, what was that reason? And I feel like that's important because it's not just the Utes or the desert archaic period people that were out there. This goes back to the Fremont and even before then. We're talking 10,000 years ago. What were these ancient civilizations doing? What did they have some type of advanced technology that we don't know about today? And if so, is it located on Skinwalker Ranch? Is it located in the basin? Maybe. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, what really matters is time. Invest in your time. You can either invest in something that creates a positive atmosphere or focus on the negative stuff. And you see time and time again, people get this tunnel vision and they spend hours debating people online or wanting to be right or trying to debunk or try to prove or disprove and this and that, infighting. It's all a waste of energy because on your deathbed, you're not going to sit there and say, man, I wish I would have, fought against UFO, whoever, this about that. And what's important is focusing on the people that you love and care about, spending as much time as you can in nature, going back to our old ancestral roots, being creative, caring for everybody. I know it sounds kind of, especially from my background, military and police, you wouldn't think this is coming from the exact opposite. But I've been blessed with the parents I grew up with, and having the time on the ranch to evolve. Because if it wasn't for that time on the ranch alone, I probably wouldn't have the mindset that I have now, where everything is energy, frequency, and vibration. And you need if people understood the secret to life was producing as much positive energy on a daily basis as what springs your celestial spirit forward into the future, forward into the universe, this whole world would be a different world. It would be a whole different world. So how do you explain that to a lot of people? You really don't. You can only make small, having this conversation, talking to people, and help promoting that. So at the very
You can only
end,
plant seeds.
the only thing that we have is time well spent. So spend it wisely. Don't focus on the negativity. I'm part of UFO Twitter, and I see some of the stuff, and I'm just like, I just shake my head. I'm like, it's such a waste of energy. And I really feel bad to some of the people that, from my background, the OSAP, who didn't get to spend the time out there, like Colin and these guys. They didn't spend all that time out there. As a matter of fact, during my time out there, they were never even out there. So it's a missed opportunity for some of these people. And I feel sorry for them, because if they, like Mr. Bigelow gave $1 million away for a consciousness study. And I thought to myself, what a waste of money. All he had to do was spend a year out there alone, like how we spent years out there alone, and he'd have a different mindset of the reality around him. A real mindset of being alone out there, because it's a whole different ball game when you're alone in nature, and especially around Skinwalker Ranch when you're not too sure what the reality around you is. It real or is it not real? So I don't know. There's a lot of stuff.
Chris, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your insights as well, your opinions. It's been so valuable, and for allowing you to really open up and share, things that you hold really deep to your heart. So thank you so much for that.
I appreciate the time. Once again, time well spent. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Where can people find you online?
Basically, UFO Twitter. I always post pictures of the ranch or other places I've investigated, like every week. Not just Skinwalker, but Mount Wilson, Blind Frog Ranch, McConkey, even my Vegas portfolio. My Vegas portfolio is 20 years deep, and obviously everywhere I go, I have my camera. And I like to show people my vision. So Chris Bartel, SWR at Twitter. And through there's other links to I have like a YouTube channel, but I need to put more stuff out there, I guess. I have all this pictures and stuff, but I need more time. I need more time to focus on making content, I guess.
And all of those links are in the description box below. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.